right, let's bring in now Kayleigh McEnany, former White House press secretary and Fox News analyst. Good morning, Kayleigh.
Good morning. Great to join you, Will.
Great to join you as well. You know, earlier in the show, Kayleigh, Pete was talking to a diner there in Cincinnati. Her name was Joan, and she was talking about what to expect from the first press conference from Joe Biden, which is today at 1 o'clock Eastern, 62 days into his presidency. And Joan said, what I hope I don't see is Joe Biden fielding a question and then sort of playing point guard as she hands it off to various members of his cabinet to answer those questions. Do you think that's a tool or a tactic that we could see employed today?
I think what he'll do is avoid the tough questions. I think he's prepared to just entirely ignore whatever's asked of him and to pivot. Any person up there at the podium is familiar with what a pivot is, but this is where it's the job of the press corps to ask him such specific questions. And what did they do to President Trump when he was in the middle of answering a question? They would interject, and it would become more of a debate than anything else. They should have that same treatment for Joe Biden, and they need to be specific questions. Like, for instance, I have not, shockingly, heard Jen Psaki ask this. She's been saying a majority of families are turned away at the border. We found out from Axios it's only 13%. Why the contradiction, Joe? That's a question that should be asked among many others.
Sure. I'm sure people are going to ask him about North Korea firing off the missiles, going to ask him about, the gun violence we have seen, going to ask him about why he fell up the stairs 3 times the other day and why he has not released his medical records, even though he promised to do so 2 years ago. And Kayleigh, the number one topic undoubtedly is going to be what is going on at our southern border. And yesterday he deputized the vice president. Kamala Harris is now the border boss. Essentially, she's going to be in charge of the partnership between Mexico, the United States, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. She's going to have to try to stop the flow of people into the country illegally because it's overwhelming. Luckily, she takes this very seriously. Remember this from a couple of days ago?
Do you plan to visit the border?
Not today. But I have before, and I'm sure I will again.
I've asked her, the VP, today, because she's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle and the countries that help. We're going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks, stemming the migration to our southern border.
So, Kayleigh, do you agree with Joe Biden that she is the most qualified person to do it?
Absolutely not. I heard Tom Homan excellently point out just how bad she's been on the border, her track record. But not only that, I think Joe Biden needs to be asked, what does this partnership or abdication of responsibility look like? Because that's what it feels like. He's deputizing her. He's basically decided that what's happening at the border is too difficult, and he's just passing it along to Kamala. So is she on an information gathering mission where President Biden will still be calling the shots, or is this just Kamala completely taking over a situation that, by the way, during the Trump administration, she called it inhumane treatment? Right. Now those same facilities are there, the Donna facility, and by the way, the one that they're upholding and letting reporters into as an aspirational facility was created under President Trump. So his facility is good. They won't let us into the facility created under Obama.
Well, you brought up the aspirational facility. It's a new word. Let's see what Jen Psaki had to say about that, and I'll come with a question for you on the other side.
The access being granted today for the pool is of a facility that is aspirational of where you want to move these children. Mm-hmm. What about access to the facilities where there is overcrowding and there is an actual problem? Why was this one chosen over those?
We're also open to providing access there, and this is just the first step in a process.
So there's something good about the fact that Kamala Harris is now in charge. It shows that they're finally admitting that there's a problem. I mean, you've been in the White House. What I think about when I hear this is all this attention in the federal government, in the press room, with the vice president, focus now on the border, a problem they created. That says there's a lot of stuff they're not talking about, they're not taking care of, they're not focusing on, which is the American people who are still reeling economically and otherwise from this pandemic. What's not getting done because of this border crisis they created?
Yeah, exactly right. There's a lot going on, but they're having to turn all attention to the border. And I've just got a picture, they're at the press podium, you're bringing forward your most important message and putting, the finest gloss you can on your administration. But I've got to wonder the kind of meetings happening there in the West Wing, because this is a cover-up. There's no other way to say it. They're not letting the cameras in because they are covering up the fact that children are shoved together in quarters. And remember, this is the same administration that says we cannot go back to school because of the risk of COVID, but yet they're doing even worse than that with children at this border facility, shoving them together. This is a cover-up. And I think that we're going to find out a lot a year down the road. Obviously, there's no congressional investigations now, but there should be, because I think there's a lot going on that we're not seeing, and there's a 5-alarm fire that's going on there in the West Wing.
Speaking of a cover-up, Kayleigh, let's move to New York. Let's move to Governor Andrew Cuomo. You have a unique perspective when it comes to a story like this. You've been a White House press secretary. You've also been involved in the media at various points in your career. What's come to light now, as of today, that CNN host Chris Cuomo managed to somehow jump to the front of the line back in the spring, almost a year ago, to get a COVID test when it was very, very difficult for any American to get a COVID test. He was showing symptoms. And because his brother was the governor of New York, still is the governor of New York, Chris Cuomo and several other members of the Cuomo family were capable of jumping the line to get a COVID test. Now, CNN's head of strategic communications, Matt Dornich, is responding this way this morning. We generally do not get involved in the medical decisions of our employees. However, it is not surprising in the earliest days of a once-in-a-century global pandemic, when Chris was showing symptoms and was concerned about possible spread, he turned to anyone he could for advice and assistance, as any human being would. Every step of the way, Kayleigh, what we keep seeing is a conflict of interest, whether or not it's the Cuomo brothers interviewing each other, or now when it comes to who gets access to a COVID test.
Yeah, this is amazing, Will. I mean, I'll never forget being in the White House, and every single day we had that Cuomo press conference, and then President Trump would come on later in the afternoon with his press conference, and we were constantly compared to Governor Cuomo, who was the wonder boy, the gold star person, the person leading the way on the pandemic, and we were constantly compared to him as a benchmark, when now we know what was going on behind the scenes. Not only this, preferential testing, his vaccines are now reportedly bullying people and seeing how favorable they were to Cuomo before giving out vaccines. This is incredible. And when you compare that to President Trump, where when the vaccines came, he said, no, my West Wing, most people are not getting it. I didn't get access to a vaccine. Others didn't get access to a vaccine before the American public. President Trump even waited to take it because he prioritized the American people. When Chris Cuomo, we now know, was being preferential to his family and to his brother. Andrew Cuomo, I should say, to Chris.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, CNN should have known that it was a conflict of interest for Chris Cuomo to be covering his brother in such a laudatory fashion. But to your point, CNN was pushing the story that Cuomo's doing a good job and Trump is doing a bad job, and that led to the Cuomo Comedy Hour that we've been watching over the last year. Watch this.
I called Mom. She said I was her favorite.
Can't believe you're lying to my audience. You've blown the credibility of the entire interview.
You've always been the meatball of the family.
Do you think that you are an attractive person now because you're single and ready to mingle?
Some say I shouldn't come on this show because you harass me.
Too much fierce accountability?
Provoke me.
Can't take it? Is it true that this was the swab that the nurse was actually using on you and disappeared, so that in scale, this was the actual swab that was being used? Was it this?
That is
or
just
was
not
it
right.
this? Tell people the truth. Come on, love
That
go.
is not.
So that was not a conflict of interest. But then in the last month or two, Kayleigh, we've heard from Chris Cuomo and CNN, it would be inappropriate for Chris Cuomo to be covering his brother, the governor, who is now facing all of these embarrassing scandals.
Stephen, you hit the nail on the head with that point, because basically when it's going well for Governor Cuomo, or they perceive it to be going well for him, he's permitted on his brother's program. But the moment it turns south, the moment he's in the middle of a Me Too scandal, a nursing home scandal, a vaccine scandal, a testing scandal, they say no coverage of Governor Cuomo on the part of Chris Cuomo. It's a way to cover it up. It's a way to basically let Chris Cuomo off the hook. But I just read that he had his lowest ratings in a year. I'm not not surprised. No one wanted to watch the Cuomo comedy hour, and now no one wants to watch Cuomo in the evening primetime hour.
Kayleigh, you know, before he took office, Joe Biden promised to work with all Americans. He trotted out the phrase unity on numerous occasions. He also talked about working specifically with Republicans. That would be what defines unity. Let's take a look back and remember the promises that Joe Biden made to work with all Americans.
I beat the socialists. That's how I got elected. That's how I got the nomination. Do I look like a socialist? Look at my career, my whole career. I am not a socialist.
Unity also is trying to reflect what the majority of the American people, Democrat, Republican, Independent, think. I'm going to be a president for all America. All, red, there's no red or blue. It's all about commitment to the American people. We're going to stay in close contact with members of both sides of the aisle and keep advancing our shared goals.
Kayleigh, 3 months into the presidency, both Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Mitch McConnell are saying they have not been invited to the White House.
Or talk to him.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm not surprised. Look, before I was with the Trump White House, I was with the Trump campaign, and we would always tell reporters, look, this guy's a marionette puppet for the radical left. He is not a moderate. And we were berated. Reporters said, how can you say that? Look at his record over time. He's been a moderate. This guy's a uniter. That's what we were told, and we knew it was not true. Now we know definitively it was never true. The way he handled the COVID relief, not inviting McConnell to the White House, he was never interested in unity. He was interested in ramming through the Green New Deal, the Equality Act, H.R. 1. He's steamrolling the radical left agenda, far more progressive than President Barack Obama.
Okay.
Yeah.
Going back to the press conference, it's going to be today at 1:15, Kayleigh. You know how that room works, although it worked differently during the Trump administration than it is now. I don't hear as many critical questions, although I do know one guy who asks as many pertinent questions as he possibly can. But do you think things are kind of turning? Because over the last couple of weeks, I've noticed more of the mainstream reporters, every once in a while, they actually get in a good question.
I do think it's turning. Look, Peter Doocy and Kristen Fisher, they led the way with tough questioning in this administration. Now you see others chomping at the bit to kind of get there to ask tough questions. I am noticing a little bit of a shift. And I've got to wonder, how much preparation is Joe Biden putting in? I remember when we would prep President Trump, we'd sit there, he'd go through his remarks, his scripted remarks on the top, and with a permanent marker, he would cross through, edit, make changes. And we'd literally have a minute or two to coach him, to say, hey, here are the questions. But he didn't need coaching. He knew where he stood. He knew his policies. He was the leader in the administration. But with Joe Biden, I'm not certain that that's the case. And so I wonder what kind of preparation. I'm sure it's a lot more than a minute or two he's putting in, and we'll see how he does, because this is not his ideal format, the back and forth and the jostling that happens in a press briefing.
Kayleigh, I can barely understand what he's saying with the mask on. I don't know if that's on purpose or what. And we talked earlier about how he hasn't met with the Republican side. Sometimes I wonder, maybe it's not that he doesn't want to work together or pretend like he's working together with them. Maybe they just don't want to show how badly he's declining. I mean, I can't understand him. And there seems to be such little access. And they know that we have these questions. What else could be the reason?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Rachel. It's a scripted presidency. It's a soundbite presidency. You remember President Trump let cameras in when he was with Nancy Pelosi. So even when he was with friend or foe, the cameras were always in. He was always taking questions. But this is a scripted presidency. They put him in these very short moments. His speeches are even short. They're a few minutes most of the time. There's no long address. And you've got to ask, why is he not giving this joint address to Congress? This is your opportunity to go forward with a positive agenda, an optimistic agenda, lay out what you plan. He's not doing it. Can he do it, I think, is the question that we're all asking. And today's going to be a big test for President Biden, his biggest yet, at least when it comes to public relations.
Yeah. A big test for him and a big test for the media as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's a good point. 1:15 Eastern time today. Kayleigh, thank you for the preview.
Thank you.